All right, here we are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, your favorite podcast from the cybersecurity times of before. Back when podcasts weren't really that popular as when we started. But all right, we're doing a follow-up episode. If you guys notice, I've got James and Jim, and then I've got a returning guest. But James, Jim, morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
We're deep into spring. Anybody have allergies?
Oh my goodness.
I do not.
The amount of pollen is like it blows across the ground. Like you can see like these yellow and green waves of
There's
going
a
across the
tree
ground.
being taken down. One of my neighbors had a dead tree, and it's a tree next to it, like stuck to a tree. So as they're basically chainsawing one away, the branches on the other one move crazily, and every time they do this, it's like somebody takes like big sacks of cornstarch, yellow cornstarch, and it just floats. It's crazy. It is nuts.
Yeah.
Hed, do you guys have pollen problems up there?
Yeah, a little bit. I have sometimes, but doesn't sound as bad as what you're describing. So.
It is bonkers here, and especially in the south of the U.S. In the southeast, we have pine trees that it's just everything is yellow for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Everything is yellow, and then you hope for a really hard storm, and it washes it all away, and it's gone. But then baby trees pop up everywhere. All right, so Hed Kovetz, welcome back. So before we're doing a follow-up episode, you guys, on last time we talked about like what in the heck is identity security, and I think we talked through the theoretical part of it really nicely. But you want to give us a quick recap, Hed, on where we talked about?
Yeah, sure. It was a few months ago, so I'll try to recap for those who didn't listen or just don't remember. So first of all, my name is Hed Kovetz. I'm the CEO and one of the founders at Silverfort, an identity security company. And last time we talked, we mostly focused on what is even identity security. What is that thing? Because many people know IAM, right? Identity and access management. Now many vendors talk about identity security as a separate thing. So what is it? In short, I will say that for many years, identity infrastructure, so managing the identities, was kind of mixed together with securing the identities. And we called all of that IAM, right? So if we were using Okta or Entra or Active Directory, we kind of expected those solutions to have some security features to secure those identities and the authentications. And I think that over time, people realized that securing the identities, that's like a specialty that you need to do not only a decoupled kind of from the infrastructure because it's a focus that you need to do properly, but also because organizations have multiple identity management solutions. So I might have Active Directory and Okta and AWS, and they manage different identities. And if I rely on the local security features of each of them, it's kind of like I'm using different endpoint protection for every type of laptop. That doesn't make sense, right? I want something that really secures all of them. And now more and more vendors are emerging in this space and saying, we're not managing the identities, that's Microsoft and Okta. We are the layer on top that secures them, right? And we talked a little bit about what does that mean to secure them, but I think, probably not didn't really get to the end of that part. So
I think this is
a bit more about it.
Now's a good time to dive into that. I think what's interesting, since between now and then we had Ward Pyles on, and we had that really interesting conversation with him about how modern or the systems that he's working with in his daily world really aren't built around identity. Like you've got the signal comes from files, memory, right? Network packets, identifying kind of patterns of behavior that way, but not from the identity itself. So I think now would be a really good time to now take the end of your last episode, the end of his, and just kind of smash it and take this together. So I think the first thing that I want to start with is, where does that leave us? Are we talking you said something that works over the top, and I ironically, how does that function? Like, is that a separate system then, kind of like an IDS? And I mean, I did that on purpose because now ID security as opposed to IDS, the terms are colliding, right? Is that now? Are we watching logs? Are we hooking in directly?
Yeah.
Give me the how.
Good question. So in most organizations, you have identity management solutions, right, or identity infrastructure, right, and that's what I call IAM. That would be, Active Directory on-prem is very common. You got like things like Entra and Okta for the cloud, but the reality is they're probably more than that, because you got some identities managed within your AWS and within your GCP and within some of your SaaS applications, even if you are using like an Okta. I mean, people use Okta and they still have some local accounts in their Salesforce and their box. For some, people created their own local accounts within there, and they're not under single sign-on. So all these islands of identity, most companies have already. For years, they were trying to secure them, kind of individually. So, maybe within your SaaS applications, you have some security features, and within your different identity management solutions, you have some other security features. And that created a lot of problems. One was obviously security, because as an attacker, I can, these solutions don't talk to each other. So if I fail to log into Okta and Okta blocked me because it's not me, I can still log into your Active Directory or Entra. They don't talk to each other. It was also a user experience problem, because, I mean, if I just logged in successfully to Okta, why are you challenging me again to log in to Microsoft? I mean, why are these solutions not talking? Why are you annoying me with multiple authentications? And the last issue was cost. I was paying for the same security features 5 times. So the idea of identity security as a platform is that you connect to all of these pieces as a separate security kind of platform that is disconnected from it, but it does read and also enforces policies on the identity infrastructure. A good way to, in my opinion, to think about it is if you think about other categories of security. Let's take, for example, cloud security. You got your cloud infrastructure, right? That's your AWS and Azure and GCP, and then you got cloud security solutions like Wiz that they're not managing the cloud, but they connect to all the elements of your cloud, and they just use the security functionality. They just apply security, and they give you visibility to the security elements. So what we're talking about here is the same for the identity infrastructure. The way that it works technically is that you integrate with each of the identity management solutions. Now, it's a different way that you need to do it with each of them. So the cloud ones mostly have APIs, right? So if you want to connect to a cloud identity solution, they have APIs that allow a vendor like us to read information, and they also, to some degree, allow you to enforce policies. So you can block a user, you can challenge a user with MFA, you can do some things. So it's bi-directional. Now, one of the challenges for us was we wanted to do the same everywhere, even for the legacy identity solutions. So how does that's for AD, right?
So I apologize for interrupting you, but
sure.
I felt like I need you, because that is where every new piece of tech always hits that brick wall at like 150 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Is you go, this is all great, and you ask the vendor, you go, but does it work on all of my other stuff that's already been in? They're like, well, no, but you're saying yes?
Yes, and that is, I think, yeah. I think you're going to like this thought. So we started the company going the opposite of where most startups were focused. So most startups were looking at how do we secure the modern things, the cloud. And by the way, the reason for that is very clear. That's what investors want to hear, right? Nobody wants to hear that I'm going to build a security solution for legacy infrastructure, because that is by definition a shrinking market, right? Everyone wants to hear that you are working on the modern stuff that is more future-facing. Problem was that there was 100 companies doing that. So we figured, okay, there's 100 companies trying to secure identities in the cloud. Why don't we actually start from the blind spot where nobody's focusing, because it's honestly it's disgusting, and that's your legacy environment, right? Your Active Directory, your Radius, your OT networks, all of these, uglier things. First of all, because we believed it's a massive security issue. And second of all, because we believe that it's an underserved market that, if we'll be able to solve that, we can easily then do the cloud. The cloud will be much easier to catch up to. And we did, right, later on. So we actually wanted to start from the legacy. So again, in this case, I don't want to just talk about us, so I'll tell you in general how it works. But again, it's a little easier for the cloud. It's just APIs. For the on-prem, it was more complex. So for the legacy, it was more complex. Because let's take Active Directory just as an example. It is, the most common one. Most organizations use it, and it's a massive security gap. Look at every data breach, every ransomware attack. That's where they focus. They steal some credentials, domain accounts, domain admins. They just move laterally in the network, and there's almost nothing you can do against it. So the idea was, how do we see everything that is happening in AD in terms of authentications, which sounds like an easy problem, just read the logs. But more interestingly, how do we intervene in those authentications in real time? So how do we, for example, block an authentication that we think is bad? Or how do we step up MFA for an authentication that goes to AD? This is a whole different problem, because visibility alone, just read the logs. It's a little messy, but you can do it. Becoming an enforcement engine for something like a legacy identity solution, that's really hard, because you need to be in line. You need to actually see the traffic and be able to intervene in the actual authentications. It took us a long time, so we worked on that. That was the first problem we went after, before going for the easier stuff. And it took us like 3 years just to figure that out. How did you even intercept those protocols and intervene in them? And what do you do about the fact that some of them are encrypted and things like that? Took a lot of work and even several patents that we filed, but the idea in short was that you basically look at the actual protocols that go to Active Directory. Again, I'm talking Active Directory. It's the same for other legacy ones. It's like LDAP and Kerberos. It's like NTLM. It's protocols that legacy servers and applications use to authenticate. You look at these actual packets, these actual messages, and you make a decision about, it's almost like a firewall for these authentications. Do you allow it or do you not allow it? But technically, there are two barriers or difficulties for doing that. One is actually intercepting them. We found a way to do it by getting the directory to forward that traffic to us. Okay, so basically on a networking level, we get the directory to just forward these packets in the backend to us. That was actually the easier problem. The second problem was, what do you do when some of these protocols are encrypted? Like, and I don't want to get too technical, but NTLM, for example, runs over netlogon. That's like an encrypted protocol. You're not supposed to have the keys unless you really hack Active Directory. So how do you even know who's trying to access what? How do you know what policy to enforce?
Yeah, I can imagine that creates it. That's a situation where people are like, wait a minute, you're introducing security vulnerabilities and solve security vulnerabilities. Hold on now.
For sure.
Or
and by the way, that's why it took us so long,
right?
is because getting the keys, we could have done that. It's a pretty messy way to do it. We could have done that, but then people would say you're causing a security issue because you're getting all of our hashes, our keys. We don't want that to leave our directory. So we had to invent a way to figure out who's authenticating to what over these encrypted protocols without actually having the keys and without breaking the encryption. And we actually figured out a way to do that. And not just a way to do it, but we even work with like Microsoft and big companies to make sure that they approve of the way that we do it, and even filed a few patents for it. And basically, the way to do it, and I'm trying to not get like too deep into the technical stuff. It's almost impossible because it is a very complex technical concept. But basically, we look at these protocols in real time, and we have a way to basically intervene in the protocol in a way that will get the directory to expose a little bit of that information ahead of the authentication being finished, although the authentication is still ongoing. So the client is still waiting for the authentication, for the response, but Active Directory already basically issued that response, and we are there, intercepting it and basically potentially blocking it if we don't like it. It's a little, again, anyone who's interested in really deep how does it work, we obviously have a deeper conversation. I don't want to bore the listeners who don't care about that. But the result of that was that, and again, doing that for every identity solution, of course, AD is just an example, we got to a point where we have a solution, and it can be either a SaaS service or a virtual machine on-prem. So, you choose what you prefer. But we get a solution that basically gets all the different identity management solutions in the network to forward authentications to us as if we are a second opinion. Think about it like that.
Oh, interesting.
So Active Directory and Okta and Entra and Ping and your Radius server and all of these different solutions, they basically talk to our solution asking us, okay, what do you think? And that's in addition to their, they still do their thing, right? They still make sure that the user exists and is in the right group and all of the basic stuff. But then they also forward it to us and ask us, what do you think, server fault? And we obviously give you visibility for everything. That's the easy part. But more importantly, we can also take action. If we see a user trying to move laterally, and we just see that, right? Because we see all the authentications across all the environments. So we will see that you are trying to log into this computer, and then you'll try to jump on that computer. And we'll see that it's like something bad, and we will potentially either block it or challenge you, stuff like that.
Okay. So that's a good time, good timing for Ward to jump in now. Because I like the idea of having that the auth systems asking you get your platform for essentially second opinion. Did that require all the ID management to essentially change how they function? Did you have to go to all the vendors and be like, hey, no, ask me, give me an opinion on this, or
no, that would have taken us much longer. Right?
I was going to say.
And also, we really wanted to build it in a way that does not depend on them, because we didn't want our technology to depend on their goodwill.
Yeah.
So we figured out a way to do it using only their existing functionality in a creative way sometimes, in a way that those vendors are supporting and they're blessing, and it's not against kind of how they planned it. But it is very different. So, I think that the biggest difference with our approach that we introduced to the market was we didn't want to just give you visibility across all the different identity solutions. We wanted to give you the ability to do inline enforcement across all the different identity solutions, which I think is really critical. And we can talk about why enforcement these days is becoming more and more important as opposed to just detection. But I think obviously with the, introduction of AI and automation is just becoming very critical to stop attacks fast. So that is kind of maybe the biggest breakthrough that we achieved. We call it runtime access protection. And the idea is really to be able to intervene and stop the bad things from happening across these identity solutions. And that is across both on-prem and cloud, legacy and modern. We now cover kind of all of the scenarios, but it took us a few years to build.
The enforcement that you're doing it's separate from the other systems, right? So as the second opinion, maybe Okta has something that enforces something similar and you're doing, but Okta's is doing it in Okta, yours is doing it separately. How do you handle the confusion maybe between, I've set it up here, my Okta admins have this all configured, and then for some reason we're set up differently over here, right? How do they battle that out to say you win versus I win?
So we come after Okta, right? We're the second opinion, not the first. So we come after AD, after Okta. First of all, they validate whatever they do, and then they send it to us. In the case of AD, there's really nothing there from a security perspective. So we will always add our security. There's really nothing AD can do. In the case of Okta or Entra, we see their decision, right? So we look at what they passed to us and we see, oh, you know, they already did MFA or they already did something, right? So then based on a policy, we can decide, okay, do we not do anything? And that's really up to you. Like, do you want us to always require MFA, for example, or do you want us to require it only if they didn't, or do you want us to never do it? It's really up to you. But what most of our customers do is they gradually turn Silverfort into the only place where they enforce identity security controls. Because think about it, why enforce them locally within the different IDPs? It makes no sense. It's like, again, it's like having different endpoint security solution for every type of endpoint or different cloud security for every type of cloud. You really want someone to do that has the full context of what's going on. Otherwise, you might be looking only within the Okta island, and all you know is what the user did within Okta, but you have no idea that that same user did something bad in AD,
Right,
or in Entra, or in Google. So you're really making decisions without good information.
So this is kind of the perfect time, and Ward, you jumped in right on time, because this is kind of where we picked up. We dropped off our last episode with Ward. We were talking about how, you know, effectively, I don't know if it words in your mouth, Ward, but effectively, like all the security tools out there that you have at your disposal, none of them really look at identity. Identity is a piece of what they look at. They're looking at signal from files, hashes, network behaviors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all post facto, right? Like it's like, hey, something happened, or maybe. So Hed's talking about doing this effectively in line and as a like the identity is the thing that they're doing. Do you think that gives you a better perspective? Like, is that the better option then?
Yeah, honestly, getting to having the controls and infrastructure correlated back to an identity is really crucially helpful on us being able to control, associate, and then enact policy. You think of, you know, dealing with access controls for role-based access and applying MFA. It's always, these controls are always correlating back to an identity. And so basing the design core off of and focus with the identity piece is really how things need to start being associated. The big challenge that I was referencing previously was it's hard to then pair these together and then even give a view prospectively after the fact of the identities and how the different controls affect the one identity. Yeah. It's all individual to the system or the audit requirement or the control, not to the person or the identity.
Yeah. By the way, one of the things we recently added, exactly because people have told us the same thing Ward is saying, is we added the concept of kind of a unified identity view where we look at the person and all the different identities that person has across, you know, Salesforce and Okta and Active Directory. And then we can look at the overall behavior and risk of that person, not the individual identity that it has, but, you know, the person, including, by the way, even the non-human identities, they also usually can map to some person, someone who owns them, someone who created them. So that context is really important. Otherwise, you're looking at just pieces of the puzzle, you know, just isolated events without being able to connect them to a story.
I'm just seeing it just from simply a management perspective, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I care who's accessing what and how and across what systems. Yeah. So you spend so much of your time looking from the bottom up and just chasing these paths, and maybe they bump into the person that they need to at one point in time. And then from that, you can start to monitor and manage. I've got to admit, I'm a itsy bit skeptical in some ways, because I think that's a big monolithic challenge, right? You're talking about being, you know, able to connect these dots cohesively across a dispersed environment. I mean, that's
saw how successful SOAR was, Jim. Is that what you're saying?
All right, so I want to dive off that, Jim, and you want to get into how difficult this is. How many environments are out there are hybrid AD and Entra, and that alone, we all struggle with.
Yeah,
you can have a parent environment, but how we're having to copy the design, the infrastructure, and they're obviously, they're functionally designed differently, Entra and AD. And when you're trying to apply a user to the different environments and controls, inherently, you have a gap in the identity, and yet they're identity systems from the same product vendor. So if you start there in your concept and just go, okay, this is a serious challenge that you are always going to be lugging up the hill. And it's where having partners and having the security space that Hed and others can fill in on and help bridge these pieces, it is really crucial. It is really helpful because the security gap is there, the control gap is there for the identity space. And so bridging those two or helping on your journey of just being able to do MFA within an AD environment of your server assets whenever you're connecting in for RDP and other SSH sessions, that isn't inherently available to us unless you're utilizing a third-party product. So if you're trying to truly get down to a just-in-time access control versus network access controls and segmentation as your dependency, and you try to do it at the identity level, you really have to have other technologies in the space because of how we are all structured out there in a hybrid environment in many cases.
Jim, I want to add to that it's interesting you say that, and I actually hear from a lot of people that are skeptical about the ability to do that. And to me, that only shows how many years were we all stuck in a certain non-ideal situation where identity security was so fragmented, right?
Yeah.
And we almost took for granted that all these silos of identity are going to be managed and secure as silos. Well, if you look at endpoints, we take for granted that every endpoint security tool needs to cover all the types of endpoints. That's like you wouldn't buy an endpoint security tool if it wasn't covering all the types of endpoints. But in identity, it seems like science fiction to us because for so long we were thinking that each of those should be secured individually, and only now the industry is finally evolving into doing what already happened for cloud security and for network security and for endpoint security. It's finally happening for identity, where there will going to be a security solution that covers all the environments. It's almost, I think it's obvious that this has to happen, and it's finally happening. And yes, it was hard to build, but I think the need for it is just so big that a lot of vendors now see that there's a huge opportunity there.
I think also the difference is and this is not an uncommon thing. I think we've said on the show a number of times, but now we have the potential to make these things happen. Technology is advanced to a point. There are methods to make these things happen. And I think you go back 5 years ago or 10 years ago, there was no way. There was not even an option to think in these kind of terms. But I mean, it absolutely needs to happen. I think we've all lived it. We've absolutely all lived it. And think about all the money that's been spent trying to find a way to synthesize this in different ways. And I think that point that you have is that umbrella technology. I'm not entirely sure if I've been thinking that.
I can tell you that when we started the company, it was 9 years ago, and nobody thought this is a good idea. So we went to investors. Everybody told us no at first, right? Everybody told us this is not a good idea. IAM, that's not an interesting market.
Of course not. No,
there are already big solutions there. It's a kind of an old market. There's not much innovation and not much opportunity. And it took us a long time to convince investors and the first customers why this is even interesting. But if you look at the last couple of years, it's exploding. The last couple of years, look at so many startups are going after this, right? With point solutions, right? With securing non-human identities or just-in-time access or entitlements or ITDR. There's like so many things. And it's because I think that finally, this paradigm of identity security and identity infrastructure being mixed together is finally breaking. And I think it's only because, as Ward said, more and more people have hybrid identity environments now. 20 years ago, you just had AD, so there wasn't much of a fragmentation issue. Well, now you got so many different silos of identity. It's just much more clear that this needs to be solved.
We also see a lot more push. A lot of the selling on the IAM side is around cyber insurance.
Yes.
right? You hear a lot more now of, oh, well, if you have a PAM solution, you can get discounts on your cyber insurance. If you have this solution, you can, deployed correctly, you can get that, right? How much stuff have we seen really take off when it hits cyber insurance or, one of these other areas of the market that really kind of pushes that forward, right?
That's,
Like, oh, wow, like now people need this. Cyber insurance is almost as good as government regulation.
It didn't. I gotta say, the first episode we did together about this, I was like, okay, this sounds a little bit science fiction-y, because I just hadn't. Well, I just hadn't heard. Shut up, Ward. I just hadn't heard it done before, right? It's like, oh, why isn't this a thing built into? And then the more you guys talk about it, and I think Ward, hearing you say the whole hybrid, like, because every environment now is a hybrid environment. I think we're kidding ourselves if we're like, no, we only have one off. You're like, yeah, that's adorable. Thanks for playing.
Yeah.
But the reality is there are very few environments that have just the one type of identity. And think about all the different places you log into every day, all the different systems, and then exclude, I mean, this is for the listeners, right? And then exclude all the SaaS apps, because you're not really going to get control over those. But now think about the places where in your environment you log into that your company controls, that are all the different dashboards, all the different consoles for it. And now go, all right, how in the world do I look at doing security on those identities in a meaningful way that isn't, and Hed, I think this is the part that caught me on this episode, is this isn't just like go back later and look at forensic accounting of what happened. This is real time.
Yeah, which is critical, because otherwise you're just throwing all this data to some SIM and it goes there to die, and nobody can really stop attacks fast enough, because these attacks are getting faster, right? They're getting more automated, they're getting faster.
Yeah.
You don't have that time anymore. You need to be able to stop the attack when the lateral movement happens, when the bad access happens. For that, you need to be somehow in line. You need to be doing some kind of enforcement.
I have an interesting analogy. Maybe this works, right? So for those of you guys that have kids, you ever have a kid that like goes to mom and says, "Mom, can I do this?" And mom's like, "No, absolutely not." And then they're like, "Wait, dad's in another part of the house, or dad's not even home. Hey, dad, I can't find mom. Can I go do this?" And dad's like, "Yeah, I guess that's fine." You're like, "Yes." So you're talking to both mom and dad and making sure that mom and dad know, hey, this is the second time this kid has tried.
And the thing is, especially with hybrid identity infrastructure, is that because the passwords are synced in most companies, I can just find the weakest link. If your AD is vulnerable, which it is, I'm just going there, and then what? I have your Entra password now, because it's the same password. You're syncing them. So people think that these are like silos that they can somehow secure as individual silos, but they can't. The attacker look at the overall attack surface, and you see it in every breach. So it does, like, to a lot of people it did sound like science fiction at first, but it works now in so many companies, and it's not just us anymore. There are a lot of startups that are going after this now. We are working already with like the biggest companies in the world, and we have like more than 1,000 enterprises using this. So it really is, it is here, it is true. I agree that for many years it wasn't, and I think still many people don't know that it's possible even today. But the good news is it is. The technology has made a big progress to solve this problem. And I think more people know now that identity is a priority. I see, the budgets and focus on identity becoming much bigger now than when we started, which makes sense. I mean, people now are kind of working from anywhere, using any device. So, the only thing left really is identity. I'm glad the market is realizing
real quick, is because we're running low on time, and I have a question I want to ask. I want to ask Ward, because he's on the implementer side and the people that have to go pay for this. Ward, multi-part question, but answer it as succinctly as you're able to. One, where does the budget come from for this? Two, how do you, like, who implements it? Like, is it a security function? Is it a different team's function? Like, or is it your team's function now?
Yeah, I love the question, because, and the last part of the question especially, because this is the challenge that identity exists in every company. Who owns it? Who's controlling it? Who's driving the strategy around it? Because at the end of the day, security frequently is looking at the exploitation factor. At the very least, they're looking at the exploitation of it, and trying to safeguard policies and controls around the identities, and then escalation of privileges to some extent. And then frequently your IT teams are actually owning directory services. And maybe they actually own the entitlements and management of entitlements. And this is where the sliding scale of identity really exists in most organizations. So for my team right now, we are very much involved into assigning groups, the management of the domain services, or directory services, and within our domains. So it really helps us own and define policy, but we are not the full owner of Active Directory itself, and Entra itself. That is a shared responsibility with our partners in IT. And so it creates a lot of conversation that needs to be had. And I'm going to answer the first part of your question with the thing I hate the most. So frequently, auditors are the reason why we're having to answer and fix these problems, because they're going to do an audit. They are the best at doing identity audits out there because it's factual based, and they can bump it up against their Workday roles and go, oh, we see someone or a contractor. Oh, they have. So you've got to have other tool sets, and that should be aligned and within and Hed runs and with the options that are out there of identifying identities that are no longer being used, et cetera. But the budget piece really comes of identifying the gaps, the problems. Hopefully you've done an assessment that can look at it, but CSF doesn't go deep into identity either. So if you're just basing your strategy off of the cybersecurity framework and looking at those considerations around the subcategories, you're gonna have gaps in what your program actually is addressing for the controls. So you've really got to look at what are the appropriate level controls in your environment that you need. And frequently, unfortunately, the security practitioners are not putting out a strategy that looks at what the control environment of their identity space is and identifying those gaps and putting forth a proposal around fixing it in front of their executive team and their board. They're looking at responding to audit findings and then fixing those, because they're just not looking at it as an advanced protection. But to Hed's point a minute ago, I do think that this has changed in the last couple of years, not just from the product space, but from the C-level space and the driver. A lot more conversation around identity is happening. And as a result, we're trying to fix some stuff because it is recognized in a number of the reports out there that identity is a serious weak point and being exploited across the board, whether that's with contractors, whether it's internal, et cetera. But a lot of the correlation back to escalation and getting ransomware exposure is frequently because an identity was compromised, and then you get an escalated or you get a very privileged identity, and then you're off to the races and can operate very effectively and efficiently for exploitation.
All right. Well, that's a good place to stop.
How difficult is it though to request the budget for that though? When you've got, you go to your board and you say, look, yeah, we've got, Beyond Trust, we've got this, we've got that, and all these have some level of security into it. Yeah. And you're basically just saying, proving the value of having a single dashboard, right? To be able to do that all as one, when they're looking at it as, wait, I'm already spending X amount, and these have some level.
You've got to look at the problems, right? And hopefully you've got a tool set that helps identify and give you that perspective of gap of problem, to your point, James, because that is frequently what you're having to put in front of your board. They've got to understand, how big of a challenge are we in? And if you have the capabilities of putting the facts in front of them, data in front of them to evidence out where the gap is, it may not be in the maturity assessment. It may just have to be very specific of, here's our gap, here's our impact of these gaps, here's what we can create efficiency around and automation around. But also identity is a really hard space to automate because of all these things that we talked about on the call or on the discussion so far. And it really creates its own little problem of not being able to automate, even though we think frequently, oh yeah, I mean, an identity, assign a role, oh, this, that. We frequently put it into a bucket of easy automation, and it's not.
Just one thing to add, when you have a proper identity security platform, it will actually save you a lot of point solutions. So instead of having an MFA solution, an ITDR solution, a non-human identity security solution, a PAM solution, all of these things, I mean, you're going to have a platform which was similar, in cloud security, you had all these point solutions, container security and CSPM and all these things before there was a cloud security platform. In endpoint, right, you had sandbox and antivirus and all of these, and then eventually there was an endpoint security platform. So once this really happens to identity, and I think we're there at this point, it will actually save you like 6-7 different products. So there is budget saving there too.
All right. Well, this is a good time to cut this because we're out of time. James, thanks for joining. Jim, thanks for being on the show. Ward, thanks for joining late, but you got the good questions, and I'm glad you were able to contribute. Hed, awesome having you again.
Thank you very much.
This continues to be interesting. I think this is something that's going to keep evolving. I do want to have you back maybe one more time on the topic of how do we identify, now take this thing and use it to go identify bad things happening. So I want to do like a follow up on this. All right, folks, if you've got questions or you want to pose some scenarios, questions to Hed, we're going to have him back on. Ward will probably come back on, but maybe late. Just kidding, bud. And we'll continue this conversation on identity security. Thanks for listening, you guys. It's been a great show. We'll see you guys another time, another place, and another down the security rabbit hole.